of us here at this table, I'd like to welcome you and to thank you for taking the time out of your day to come here today. The facts that we're going to talk about today are crucial for each and every one of you. They're the very essence of your lives, your health care, and your standard of living. The goal of the Alliance is to educate people and to help people to maintain a certain standard. I'd like to introduce the president of the Alliance for Retired Americans of Pennsylvania, Gene Friday.
Thank you very much, and as Judy said, thank you for coming today. This is really a great response. We hope that you learn a lot today, and we want you to take it home with you and educate your family, your neighbors, your friends. We really need to have people understand what's going to transpire here over the next couple of months. Social Security is very important to all of us. No matter what party we're in, we want our Social Security. So thank you again for coming. I do want to thank Judy. Judy has really made it possible for us to get into the Erie area. We never really had anyone who had the dedication that Judy has. Believe me, when you know Judy, you know that compassion is still alive and well in our country. There isn't much of it, but we certainly have it up here in Erie thanks to Judy. At this time, I would like to introduce our special guest. We're very honored to have Eric Kingson with us today. Eric is the co-director of Social Security Works along with Nancy Altman. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Nancy. She's another expert on Social Security. Eric's a professor of social work at Syracuse University and a senior research associate in the Maxwell School Center for Policy Research. He served as a policy advisor on 2 presidential commissions. The 1982 to 1983 National Commission on Social Security Reform, which was done the right way. I would like to see them do the same thing right now. And he was also on the 1994 Bipartisan Commission on Entitlement and Tax Reform. So Eric, thank you very much for joining.
So here's what I'm going to say today, and in varying ways. Social Security and Medicare work, and they work well for Americans, and the American people like these programs, and they understand it. These programs are under attack, remarkably under attack, for programs that are so critically important to every one of us, and to our children, and our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. In fact, I'm going to say this, seniors are threatened in the discussion that's taking place today, but even more so, people in their 50s, early 50s who've lost housing equity, people who've lost jobs sometimes, have not had much in the way of wage increases, people who have lost pension coverage or seen their pensions diminished in value. These people are extraordinarily threatened because they don't have time to catch up. People in their early 50s. Our children in our 40s, in their 40s, in their 30s, they are threatened. The core protection Americans have against retirement, disability, or death of a parent and leaving a young child, for instance. The core protection we have that's rock solid unless we allow Washington to pull it apart, and there's a danger of that. The core protection we have is Social Security, and the core protection senior and people with disabilities have is Medicare, in terms of health coverage at this moment. So the other piece of this message, and then I can go home, is that it's up to all of us, every one of us, to send a message to Congress, to your congresspeople, to your senators, and to the President of the United States, that you want to preserve this system for ourselves, but even more importantly, or as importantly, for our children and our grandchildren. Social Security and Medicare give expression to core values in our society. The idea that we really are part of a society. We are part of community. Yes, we're individuals, but we're individuals within community, and our lives take meaning within that. It's an earned benefit. We do have responsibilities. We have religious sense of honoring our parents, caring for the neighbor, a form of charity that appears, and a form of expectation that appears in virtually every religious tradition. The idea of dignity, that every human being should live with dignity, is embedded in the system. And I say this because Oftentimes we don't have that discussion. We talk about Social Security as facts and figures and projected shortfalls, projected this and that. We forget that the core purpose is to protect the American public and to achieve some values we want to advance as a society, as a good society. So I bring that up, and I think that's a part of the discussion. And before Social Security and Medicare, there was the poorhouse. There's sort of a historical amnesia in our country. People forget that without these systems, the fear of old people, particularly single women who were old, was ending up in the poorhouse. We still have fears. We still have problems, and there are reasons to be fearful, but these programs abolish that pretty much. In terms of Pennsylvania, 2.5 million people receive benefits every month. We can divide that up. You get a picture. 1.7 million retired workers. The numbers are there, and I'll make these PowerPoints available. I'm not going to go into any great detail, but the point is that every month, $2.7 billion flows into Pennsylvania in Social Security benefits. That's money flowing into your pockets. Let me just do. What percentage of Social Security do you think is spent on administration? 20? Let me raise your hand. I'll say 40%, 20%, 5%, 2%, 1%. Someone said it. A little less than 1%. It's a remarkably well-administered program. And it's important to our economy, especially when we have a recession, that these monies flow in. In your congressional district, this is the 3rd congressional district. In your district, there are 137,000 people who receive Social Security benefits each and every month, out of about 650 or 60,000 people in the district. 21% of the 3rd congressional district receives Social Security benefits. That's $146 million flowing into this district each and every month, or $1.175 billion over the year. That's really important to people. We value. We have a program that is not in crisis at all. In 1982, there was a crisis. I was staff to the Greenspan Commission the last time major legislation was passed. We had a crisis. If Social Security legislation didn't go through early in 1983, we would have had to reduce benefits a bit. Benefits, the full amount of benefits would not have gone out to the public because Social Security has no borrowing authority. It can't borrow, so it would have had to cut benefits. Now, obviously, members of Congress did not want to be present when they cut benefits, so they came up with a fix. It was a good fix. So we have a program, again, it cannot borrow. It has nothing to do with the deficit. In fact, Social Security loans $2.7 trillion right now to the federal government. Right. By law, it cannot borrow a penny, and it has nothing to do with the deficit discussion. But even so, the politicians keep throwing it in. And we've gotten them, those of us like ARA and other groups have been working to try to bring some sense to this on Social Security. We've gotten people to say, the president says, even Mr. Bowles and Mr. Simpson, who chaired that commission, a lot of people now say Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit, we get it. But then they say, but we're going to try to fix it anyway. And the way they want to fix it isn't so good. Medicare works. Of course there are problems with all these systems, but 48 million Americans receive Medicare coverage. It's terribly important. In Pennsylvania, 2.3 million people. Many people would not have health insurance without Medicare. Before you have to go, everyone in this room may remember, 1965, before Medicare was passed, the worry, I won't say everyone in this room, I don't think Aaron does, or Adam, but everyone may well remember that the fear was you couldn't afford to go, if you had a health problem, to the hospital. You could be bankrupt, or your children could be bankrupt. Medicare ended that fear. Medicare provides basic protection. Not perfect, but it's hugely important. It's improved the well-being of older populations and people with disabilities. And guess what? Its administrative costs are low, 2% about it. And it's far better at controlling the rise of healthcare costs than the private sector. So this system has a lot that we need to preserve. So I think I've tried to establish we have a program that works. I'm also going to now talk about how this program is under attack. Merciless, ongoing attack, decade after decade, and especially today. Alf Landon, how many of you remember who Alf Landon is? He ran against Roosevelt in 1936. He ran on a platform saying that, among other things, that he really campaigned on was that darn Social Security program. It's going to take your money and it's giving you worthless IOUs. That's a theme that another president picked up a few years ago, too. Worthless IOUs. Of course, those worthless IOUs is what sustains us. So from Alf Landon through, my gosh, today we've had ongoing attacks. Now, although in the 50s and 60s we pretty much had a strong consensus, and even the 70s, this program was good, it worked. President Eisenhower, who a moderate conservative Republican, President Eisenhower really said some remarkable things. I'm going to say this from memory, but Eisenhower, writing in the mid-1950s to his brother Edgar, says, if any American, actually, it's so good, it's worth reading it directly. So, wasn't planning to, but Eisenhower's language is so wonderful. Should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear of that party again in our political history. This is a conservative, moderate, Republican war hero. There is a tiny splinter group, of course, that believes you can do these things. Among them are H.L. Hunt. That's like the Koch brothers today. Among them are H.L. Hunt, a few other Texas oil millionaires, and an occasional politician or businessman from other areas. I love this. Their number is negligible, and they are stupid. So we go from Alf Landon to George W. Bush, who makes a run at privatizing Social Security. I guess I'd only say, imagine today what would have happened if Social Security had been privatized. You know, if it had been privatized in the 1980s, every one of us in this room, or in the 1990s, we would have been in a terrible situation. And some of us have been privatized in 2005, we would be losing a lot. That was fought back, but then there was a new attack, and this is sort of the story of Social Security. At every juncture, it's been attacked. 1983, we had a financing problem. We addressed it with good legislation. As soon as the ink's dried on the legislation, there's a new strategy that emerges on the right. Tell young people and convince them they won't get Social Security. Tell them it's not going to be there for them. Tell people 55 and over, don't worry, you'll get yours. Whatever changes we make will protect people near retirement and seniors. But delegitimate the system and then drive through changes that will radically reform it, like privatization or like means testing or cutting it away. And that's been a strategy that's been pursued mercilessly. It's been pursued in all sorts of ways. First, they tell you it's unfair. It's unfair to women. It's unfair to rich people because they don't get as much back per dollar they put in. It's unfair to poor people because we don't eliminate poverty totally, 100%, even though we do the best darn thing in preventing it. It's unfair to African Americans. They don't live as long. It's unfair to Hispanics. They don't live as long, which isn't true, but they drove that truck for a long time. Everything they could find, they threw at it. It didn't stick. Then they talked about generational equity. It's unfair to young people. It's only a program for old. Baloney. It's a very narrow view. Then that didn't work. They went into privatization, and now they found something that really is working very well. They framed Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid as part of a universal, quote, entitlement program. I was staffed to the 1994-95 Entitlements Commission. I talk about it as a commission that turned an 11-letter word, entitlement, into a 4-letter word. Purposefully marketing the idea that these aren't earned benefits, these are things that people shouldn't feel entitled to. These are these nasty entitlements. Interesting thing, you ask Americans what they think of entitlements. In focus groups, in some of the work that was done this year, they don't like entitlements. Then you ask those same people, well, what do you think of Social Security and Medicare? Oh, they aren't entitlements. So it's really, we've been fed pablum of ideology and propaganda on these issues. And it's been very well orchestrated in the past 15, 20 years. $1 billion has been put into it. $1 billion by Pete Peterson, a hedge fund mogul who made a lot of money in hedge funds. Got a lot of the tax breaks, by the way, that hedge fund people get, having their income taxed at only 15% when the rest of us pay higher taxes. They have worked hard. They've defined our problems today as spending, completely ignoring history. How did we get here today? 2 wars that we didn't pay for. We put all the burden on the men and women who are fighting, and we didn't pay for it. Tax cuts that mainly benefit the well-off. And also, Medicare pharmaceutical benefit was passed without funding it. And then we had this recession. That's how we got these deficits. But you would think we got these deficits because people are just spending money on the old, or on the disabled, or on whatever. It's not the case. But that serves a very important purpose. It distracts us from real problems. Creating jobs. Instead of talking about austerity in the midst of the nation's second worst recession that many of us fear will come back. Many of us fear that we're looking at a double-dip recession because government's contracting. That's what sensible economics tells you. We have a difficult problem coming up because state and local and federal governments are reducing their spending. We're not putting stimulus in the economy, which is critical. That's what gets you out of this kind of horrible recession. Putting Americans to work. In the name of protecting future generations, they opine, we've got to cut these entitlements. Well, what good is that going to do for the kid whose father or mother doesn't have a job? And would have a job if we did some sensible things like make investments in better schools, make investments in improving our roads, and improving our infrastructure, in research development. We have a national conversation that's been hijacked by this austerity mode. And frankly, it's everyone's fault as far as I can see in Washington. It's certainly the president's fault, it's certainly Republicans' fault, and the Democrats, a lot of them have gone along with it too in the House and the Senate. It's a mantra for cutting and getting rid of core protections without letting the American people know what's going to happen. What happens when you don't have the FAA doing its job as well? What happens when you don't have public health services and you have a public health disaster? So that's been a piece of the strategy, and then the other piece of the strategy has been to define Social Security as a budget problem, as a cause of the budget problem, as opposed to separating it out as it ought to be. As, yeah, we have a shortfall, we can get to it, it's not a big deal. And I say that because, just to give you a sense of it, I'll say it this way. If you wanted to, we have a shortfall in Social Security. After 25 years, it's about 23 cents short on the benefits that Americans are earning today. That's the equivalent in dollars, by the way, of what you will lose if we extend the Bush tax cuts to the top 2% of American households. American households with more than $250 million. The politicians are whining. We have to continue the Bush tax cuts to the rich. How many people here make over $250,000? Would you all raise your hands? No. Well, that's the point. That costs as much as it would cost to fix Social Security. Or asking, and this is, sorry? No, asking those 6% of Americans who do not pay Social Security payroll tax contributions on earnings above $106,800, asking them to pay it on all of that. It's called scrap the cap. Ask every American to do that. That eliminates the financing problem we project in Social Security. This is not a huge concern. Social Security is running, even with the aging of baby boomers, at a relatively small share of GDP. There's only a tiny rise as a result, and then it flattens out. So this is a very simple problem to deal with, but it's made much more complex by the Deficit Commission and the super committee that we've established today. We have a program that works. We have a program that's valued by Americans. It really doesn't matter whether if you go outside of Washington, D.C., and you go outside of the elites in the press, the talking heads, you go outside of that and you ask Americans how they feel about Social Security, they're really united. They don't want to see benefits cut. It doesn't matter whether you ask a union household or a household that identifies with the Tea Party. Between 70 and 80% of those demographics say do not cut benefits. It doesn't matter whether you ask Republicans, Independents, or Democrats. Little variation, but it's 70 to 80%. And the intensity of that is amazing. It's strong, because Americans know what it does in their families. And the same basic thing applies to Medicare. We have a program that we value.